Children, we have an interesting thing before us. It's time for reading time with Daddy. Now, someone who frequents Daddy's abodes has decided to write a story, but we're going to see exactly how good it is. So Daddy will read it, and if there are any mistakes, then they're going to be outlined. Yes. Today we have Episode 22, The Year of the Bear by Button Fly. Right. Lady Faramay had entrusted Julia with a map. It was an old dated leather roll of land she barely recognized, the major geographical landmarks being the only thing that still tied it to its intended purpose. The eastern hills of which Faramay was sending them was home to the last bit of civilization at the end of the kingdom. It was known for its long string of homesteads, families of people who etched out a favourable life through hard-working, tilling, mining, and harvesting the land. It was a homely existence, beloved by those who'd thrown themselves wholeheartedly into the effort, an investment spanning generations intended to pass on through legacy. As far as Julia was concerned, it was entirely too mundane and monotonous for someone with her worldly ideals. Uh-huh. Still, she'd enjoyed her pastime. She enjoyed her pastime there, brief though it was, learning all there was to love about such a place. It wasn't all sweat and sunshine either. Beyond the homesteads, past that area known as the Eastern Hills, at the place where the King's lands came. What? No, that's correct. That's correct. Came to an abrupt end. A flat expanse of tundra began. What? A flat expanse of tundra began that spread out far out to the distant east. There were the lands of the Heesh, a barbaric people said to live by brutal savagery. From the circle of the civilized world, even as far north as Ipswich. Oh, you're so clever. You're so clever, being from a. Actually, I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to look it up. So Ipswich, New Zealand. Oh, do you use Oh no, you don't have a New Zealand. You don't have a New Zealand in You don't have an Ipswich in New Zealand. No, you do. Don't have a New Zealand. What the fuck? You don't have a New Zealand in You don't have an Ipswich in New Zealand. Oh, that's why I'm talking to myself. Fantastic. No, you don't have a Ipswich in New Zealand. We have one here. They also have one in the UK. Considering you're from a Commonwealth country, Buttonfly, I can see where you get your inspiration from, even if you want to be a smartass and you want to add a T in there. Like, I don't see what you're doing. No, it's good. So, from the circle of the civilized world, even as far north as Ipswich and the territory of the Bears, tales were told of the Heesh and their murderous skirmishes. Bloodthirsty men on monstrous mounts pillaging the unprepared and stealing away with slaves. Or if one was unlucky, hostages intended for ransom. Julia had no personal experience with the Heesh, but she'd heard the stories firsthand, spoken from mouths marred with physical scars caused by such accounts. She knew as well as anyone that time spent along the Haitian border was time that would lead to an inevitable encounter. This was all well and good had they been This was all well and good had they been merely traveling with one L. What? Traveling? Isn't it a double L? Okay, so what's the difference between two L's and one L then? Make a journey typically of some length. Is that a discontinued word? Because I've only ever seen it spelled with two L's. Yeah, you can do it either way. So you've spelled it with one L, but I don't know why. I've only ever seen it spelled with two L's. So you can do either or either. I honestly, that looks bad to me. It looks wrong to me, but you can do whatever the fuck you want. I'm just pointing it out. Uh this was all well and good had they been merely travelling to other homesteads with their able-bodied men watching from well-crafted defences with thoughtful strategies in place, but they weren't. I like to stick to the UK, not the US. Eh. Julia considered the map as she waited for her companions at the edge of the market. Carmel. Oh wait, how does the garbage man say it? Carmel? Should I say Carmel? Is that how I should say it? Button play. Carmel. Carmel. Please, garbage man. Don't it's Carmel. Carmel. It's like you break it up real easy. Carmel, not Carmel. Not all fucking Americans. Carmel had insisted on leaving at first light, which meant the one-day stopover at Fairmay Estate was over all too soon. While she loved being on the road and off in search of her next adventure, typically it was at her own pace, with the trimmings of civilization on hand to ease the next leg in her journey. It was all very well and it was all well and good living a life of frivolity, traipsing around the wilderness, stopping from place to place, stopping from place to place. Uh, Interesting. But those pauses at places in between made it all feel a little more manageable. Now, travelling, spelled with one L again, with bears, whether by force or instruction, it seemed they never stopped, and if they did, it was only to involve themselves in some sort of trouble. The road rolled out beneath them, a jaunt across the tamed fields of Landon's countryside. Oh no, not London where there's Ipswich, Buttonfly. No, it's not London, it's Landon. Like Ipswich isn't Ipswich because it has a T in it. I can see what you're doing. I can see what you're doing. All right. The idea hasn't been lost on me. All you need is for your fucking bears to have high tea, and then you'll just really roll it into one package. And with a queen that constantly waves with a robotic arm. Anyway, uh huh. I'm sure. I'm sure that's what it is. The road rolled out beneath them, a jaunt across the tamed fields of Landon's countryside, with its well-known roads and common folk working the land. They stopped in small towns and roadside inns as they travelled, a welcome change to the endless rides broken only by sleeps on hard earth under obscured stars. For days they travelled, making good time. A good company. Making good time. A good company. Lighter and more free now than under the burden Cass was lifted. Oh, I get it. A good company. Never mind. I thought you were going with something else. While leaving her where they did, had stirred a deep conversation between Carmel and the bears. Julia too, for that matter. All right. So with this part here, I would honestly put that between commas if it were me. It's just these kind of asides that brackets do to stories is When I go through and I read the first chapter of Star Shadow, you'll understand why I wouldn't do it that way. Um, it matters. Yeah, okay. So Buttonfly says, yeah, it does. It does ruin the flow. Buttonfly says, okay, I started with commas, but it felt weird when I reread it. It matters how you read it over how it is ultimately overall read. It matters what's correct over what you think sounds right in your head. For me, I would put commas in, but hey, if you want to fucking leave it, I mean, it's your story. Because the reason why I have such a problem with it is because immediately afterwards there's no comma here to break up the thought. You just continue on with the thing. I like the commas. Oh, good, you like them too. I think commas works better there. That's just me. Your story though. So while leaving it, okay. So while leaving her where they did had stirred a deep conversation between Carmel and the Bears, Julia too for that matter. In the end, no one contested the decision. Never had a decision been made more amiably since. Hmm, you can go either or. This is the word that your word exists, but I guess context matters. This one is chatting, and this one is more of like a diplomatic conversation and dispute resolution. Personally, I would go with amicable, but considering they're kind of friends, I mean, amiable is probably closer to the point. Just pointing out that you can use either or. That's all Daddy's pointing out, children. Never had a decision been made more amiably since, before that point. What? Never had a decision been made before. More. Never had a decision been made more amiably before. Oh, wait a second. Never had a decision been made more amiably since before that point. Hmm. I don't like that sentence structure. Never had a decision been made more amiably since before that point. The solutions offered for Cass's predicament had been anything but pleasant. It works. I just hate the way it's structured. No, fuck it. I'm moving on. Kodiak, being more extreme of mind with regard to Cass, had also been the most quiet about her passing to Lady Faramay's care. While Julia had always anticipated shame to result from his constant calls for her execution, to her surprise it never had. She come to regard him as a man of concern. Those concerns tended to revolve around the nearest threat, of which he perceived to be many. Hmm. So when Cass had suddenly removed, so when Cass was suddenly removed from the party's presence, so too was the turmoil that reverberated around much of the group. His conflict with Carmel in particular, the two seemingly on the edge of physical violence much of the time, was now gone and replaced with something else entirely, to the point where Julia now saw him as a different man, particularly when one day he thought to broach the topic with her. With Carmel forging the path up ahead and Dolev lagging behind, Julia found herself riding boot to boot with Kodiak. His horse reined back to pull up beside hers. In her eyes, Kodiak was a wild man, tamed enough to be able to function within the social fabric of others. He was he was jovial much of the time, making light of others' shortcomings, laughing when he thought something was funny, playing when it might amuse him, but he also had a glint of ferocity in his eyes, like a sharp edge held in the wing, waiting the lash out. Waiting to lash out. Sorry, brain. She had barely seen any of it. Perhaps a flash here or there when tensions were heightened, or during the moments of conflict with the. Is that Yos? Yos. Y-O-S. Yeah, right. Yeah. In conflict with the Yos. In the north, what she had noticed about him more than anything else were the long, thoughtful stares doled out to everyone each and every day. Oftentimes from the edge of firelight when no one thought to look. Julia Julia would turn to find his gaze locked on hers, musing, questioning, calculating, or some other unknown pattern of thought turning over in his mind. More often than not, he'd continue to stare well beyond the point of discomfort. Julia often wondered why that was, but had never been brave enough to push for an answer. Even when she probed, inquiring with a simple "what?" or something similar, it why is there a capital H there in the middle of a fucking sentence where there's no if there was a period here or a full stop, that would be a capital H. That's a comma. That should be a lower level. That should be a lower level H. Buttonfly. He had simply shrugged and kept on as he was, forcing her to look away and to try and think on something else. Kodiak looked over at her again now, but this time with something to say. A, hmm. Ah, yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. About your lady, that normal. And there you did. You fucking did it again. In here. Look here. Unless he is royalty, that capital H shouldn't exist. Unless she is royalty or God, this should not be a capital H. So I don't know what exact title this woman has that they're referring to, but unless she is like a king or a queen, or a deity or god of some kind, that capital H should not exist. That should be a lower level H. Anything lower than what I've described should not be. She should not be addressed in such a formal way, ever. About your lady, that normal, her taking in strays. Uh, that normal, her taking in strays like that. Wait, that shouldn't even be there. Is he saying informally? Is it normal for her to take in strays like that? Is that what you're saying? Like, is he saying it like that normal, her taking in strays like that? Because if that's an unbroken sentence, in which case that comma should also not exist. So I don't know how you mean this, but the way I read it, unless he's referring to her as normal, as in a derogatory sense. Oh, okay, kill the comma. Okay, fine. Julia realized Kodiak was referring to Cass and wheeled from her idle thoughts on the topic at hand. Strays? He cocked an eyebrow? Yeah, something like that. A bit odd, you don't think? A bit odd, don't you think? Taking people in on demands? Seems like a special kind of person who puts themselves in that position. Julia pondered for a moment, wondering where Kodiak was getting his ideas, and more importantly, where he was going with them. Special? What do you mean? Kodiak shrugged. Lady with her wealth and influence. Lady with her wealth and influence seems to get her way, is all. Makes a bear wonder to what end. He sniffed, looking away nonchalant to the distant countryside. If you're worried about Cass, you needn't be. Worried, huh? About her? Glad to be rid of that pesty. What the fuck is a pesty? Like, is there supposed to be an L in there, and that's supposed to be pestle? Like a mortar and pestle? If it's supposed to be a pest, it's just P-E-S-T. Unless it's supposed to be pesty. Anyway, I'm going to say pest. Glad to be rid of that pest before it could spread or do us harm. Pesty is a term they used at the start. Well, I don't know what it fucking means. I would understand if they were calling her a pest. But, If it's pesty with a capital P, then it should have a capital P, and that pesty doesn't have one. Where was I? I was at pesty. Where's pesty? Pesty. There we go. That's pesty. Well, whatever your concern, I've never witnessed or any ill intent. She took me in when I was a girl and I wasn't a stray, just someone prone to mischief who she saw promise in. My parents agreed to leave me under her tutelage. I think for me it turned out well. That comment doesn't need to be there. She said with a chipper tone. She taught you to spy then, Kodiak mocked. Julia gave Kodiak a wry smile. No, she taught me to write and gave me direction. She paused, then added, spying was always in me. She flashed him a grin. Huh, I'd believe it. So what's in the box? Kodiak nodded to the parcel tied to the rump of her horse. Julia shook her head. I don't know. She shrugged. Milady said it was none of my concern and to leave it alone. And you're not curious? He raised his brow. Of course I am. Which is why she told me to leave it alone. She knew I'd have to open it with my hands, and as soon as we'd stepped out the door, Kodiak hummed at the thought of that for a moment before continuing. So he went, oh, okay, yeah, I get it. That's one. Had to do it myself. So he said, the pesty, but sure. Yeah, well, look, that's a thing. If it's a foreign word, like in a foreign language that you're trying to do something with, yeah, sure, italics it to point it out. Because in other books, like in books where the Wheel of Time is a classic example, when they say words that are in a different language in that book, like when they're speaking in what's it called? Let's just call it like old speak for lack of a better term. I know it's got a language, but when they're talking in a different language there or using one word out of the ordinary, they always italics it to so it doesn't seem like an error. It's really driving the point home that it's a foreign object or it's a foreign term. Get my meaning? So for me, I would probably do it. But look, if you want to add pesty in there with a capital P, be my fucking guest. You want to leave it as lowercase pesty with nothing? Fine. You want to italics it? Be my guest. Neither here nor there. It's such a little thing. But other authors do the same thing all the time as well. It's just you gotta look for it to see it. I'm sure you've seen it 100,000 times, but you never really paid attention to it. I pay attention to that shit only because yeah, it doesn't matter. Uh all right. That's why she told me to leave it alone. She knew I'd have to open it in my hands as soon as we'd step out the door. Kodiak hummed for a moment before continuing. That you didn't say. What you didn't say. What did you say she saw in you? Promise? Sounds like she has you wrapped around her little finger. And he clicked his cheek. He clicked his cheek? How does one click a cheek? Do you mean he clicked his tongue? Because unless he grabbed his cheek and he did this. Hang on. Wait, look. That's not exactly clicking. That's just making a wet dick and vagina noise. But it's called to click your tongue, is what it's called. It doesn't matter where in your mouth it does it. It's a very distinct noise made by one very distinct thing. They usually call it clicking your tongue. But anyway, I digress. It wasn't clear if the words or the click that annoyed her more, but the whole thing got under Julia's skin. She frowned. Well, if I were more of a vagabond, perhaps I'd be more accustomed to rummaging through other people's things. Tugging on the rein of her horse, she turned back the way they'd come, peeling away from the conversation Kodiak entirely. Kodiak's Kodiak strolled on but leaned back. No, Kodiak strolled on but leaned back. Unless you're talking about the horse. Unless you're distinctly talking about the horse. But then you're talking about the horse in the first person in the last paragraph. Oh, that's an error. Okay. Kodiak strolled on, but leaned back, calling out one last jab. You promise? He laughed and waved an arm dismissively. Alright, so there we go, boys and girls. We have done one live edit, and it only took 25 minutes. Uh, yeah. The bears are on a journey, and on their beautiful journey, there is a box, which no one knows what's in it. It's kind of like the briefcase out of Ronin, and we're never going to find out what's inside it. And a bit of backstory for Kodiak by the looks of things. Not too bad. Julia's still a bitch, but yeah, it is what it is. Fuck her. Because Carmel, he's the only boy that matters. He's the biggest and best boy. Kodiak, but will be adopted one day, but never Julia. She should have stayed at the orphanage. Worthless. All right, so that is one live edit of episode 22, Year of the Bear. This is the end of my streams, so I'm gonna go now, and this will be uploaded to YouTube for everyone else's perusal. If you haven't checked out Buttonfly's stories, I encourage you to do so because I don't know, it's something different. He puts in a lot of effort, even if his spelling errors are numerous. It's better than most. It's definitely better than Star Shatter, but anyway. Also, check out The Garbage Man. He also writes good stories. And that's all I've got to say about that. Thank everyone for watching. Daddy loves all of those who have subscribed to him on any platform and deeply has indifference for everyone else. I will see you in time. Love you very much.